Good evening, everyone. I'm hoping we'll have some more folks trickle in, but I think we'll go ahead and get started since many of you have showed up on time. I'm Lorraine Branham. I'm the Dean of the Newhouse School, and thank you all for being here this evening for this very special guest. And I'm going to, I'd like to introduce our Associate Dean. You know, I actually gave him this title, but it's so long now, and I can hardly remember it. But he is the Associate Dean for many things here at Newhouse, including this lecture series, which is a very important one in the life of the school. So I'd like to bring up to the podium to introduce our guest for the evening, Professor Hub Brown, who's in the Department of Broadcast and Digital Journalism. Hub?
That's okay. It still fits on a it still fits on a business card. Oh, sure. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I am. Yes, I am Hub Brown. I'm the Associate Dean for Research, Creative Activity, International Initiatives, and Diversity in the Newhouse School, and I do teach in broadcast digital journalism. But it is a real privilege to be a part of our Leaders in Communications series. Oh, by the way, parenthetically, if you are tweeting about this event, the tweet is Comms Leaders, capital C, capital L, Comms Leaders. That is our Twitter handle that we're going to be using in our discussion this evening. But yes, it is a real privilege to be a part of this, a real privilege now that I get to introduce Kierna Mayo, who comes to us from the big city, from NYC, from the center of the publishing world, but also the center of the world for a lot of us who have read publications that talk to us in the Black community for so many years. And as we were talking about at dinner, Ebony was one of those. When I was growing up, well, many years ago, but certainly as a child and watching the civil rights movement unfold on our televisions and unfold in the newspapers and in other places, we had the voice of Ebony magazine, and it was ours. And it has gone through so many transitions, and this woman here is leading a mighty transition forward for Ebony magazine. Kierna Mayo serves now, of course, as the editor-in-chief and the vice president of digital content, in addition to defining the overall editorial direction for Ebony magazine. This role is responsible for maintaining all of the tonal and aesthetic consistency of the Ebony brand across all platforms. Since taking the helm of Ebony in June 2015, Kierna Mayo has already been recognized in the industry on both the Route 100 and Folio 100 as a media game changer. She joined the Johnson Publishing family in 2011 as editorial director, digital, and led the branding efforts for the reimagining of Ebony online. Mayo spearheaded the site's development from concept and wireframes to reality, and was responsible for staffing across all the verticals and all the departments of Ebony. Under her direction, following the launch of Ebony.com, Ad Age listed Ebony magazine as a 2012 magazine brand to watch. Ebony.com was named a Best Digital Magazine finalist in the MinFolio 2013 Best of the Web Awards, and as well as a 2013 Salute to Excellence, an NABJ Digital finalist and winner. Kierna Mayo began her career in the 90s as an early hip-hop journalist, exploring gender issues within the art form. She later catapulted to co-creator and founding editor-in-chief of the groundbreaking Honey magazine. Her writings have appeared in newspapers, academic texts, and multiple books, including And It Don't Stop, the best American hip-hop journalism of the last 25 years. For over 2 decades, Mayo has covered the intersections of race, women, and culture for leading national publications, including Essence, Vibe, and Marie Claire, among others. Prior to joining JPC, she was a creative consultant for Black Entertainment Television, Viacom, editorial director of Tyra.com, and senior editor of Cosmo Girl, a Hearst publication. She is a graduate of the great Hampton University. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Kiernan Mayo.
Come on in, get comfortable. Hello, everyone. You guys in the back don't want to come down a little closer? It's a family. Well, thank you, Hub, so much. Thank you to you, and thank you to Lorraine Branham. I do appreciate you all having me here. I was saying earlier to someone that I don't get enough opportunities to come talk to young people. I get invited all the time, but I am still very much a line editor. I still touch every word in the magazine and every single photograph. So, you know, you can only be in two places at once, but this is so refreshing already, just to have the dialogue and just to know that there are still people in the world who believe in a career in media. I imagine that you all think of yourselves as content creators to some extent. There are variations on that theme. Some of us call ourselves journalists first and foremost. I myself self-define as a writer because I think before I was a journalist, I recognized that I was a writer. So since it's a small group of us, I'm not going to really spend too much time talking at you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and why I think I've been invited here today, and what I think I have to share about my life journey that might impart something to you. It's important to know, really, whenever you're at a lecture and you're taking in the words of someone else, that you're really just looking, you're gleaning whatever it is that speaks to you most, and you're running with that. So I hope that this conversation, we'll call it a conversation, that I asked Hub if it would be okay if I called it Unapologetically Black, is something that speaks to you whether you are a Black person, a person of color, or not. Because I do think that there are some gems in this kind of thinking where being a self-possessed person who recognizes his or her own core strengths kind of carries you in life. So this is something that you can apply in the world of media and throughout. So I will get started. I reckon that you all are smarter than me. And I say that humbly because I went to a Black university in the late 80s and early 90s and did not have the resources that you all have, nor was the world, quite frankly, at a place that it is right now, where your very ideas can be put on a public stage as soon as the idea comes to your mind, and you can get feedback. So when I say that you're smarter than me, I mean that a lot of your grad students, for one, I only went to undergraduate, but I also recognize that the world is at a place right now where anyone who is a probing thinker, anyone who is a committed journalist, anyone who is an artist even, in the sense of content creation, has a major, major jump on everyone of my generation. So I just have to preface my story with that. And I hope that that's not lost on you generationally, you know, how special this time is for you, because you should seize every possible medium available to you, and you should seize every opportunity. A little bit about my journalistic career. None of yours will be the same, as I've primarily had a print publication life. So I do now know that there are some unicorns in the room, and there are some people who are actually studying magazine journalism. But even if you're not, I believe that there's some bits of my story that might speak to you. In the places that I was, and even more than that, what I represented at those stops is something that you all may find a parallel spirit in, let's just say. My first stop, I'll start there. My very first stop was at the Source magazine. I was 21 years old, and I walked out of Hampton University with no internship and no job. I had applied for an internship at the legendary Essence magazine that was then an independent publication and is today a Time Inc. publication, and didn't get it. I didn't know how to go about getting an internship at any of the major publishing houses. I didn't know anyone personally. Our media department was at best a fraction of what you all have available to you now, both in terms of resources, but also in terms of professors who have been out in the world. Part of my problem at Hampton was that I had a big chip on my shoulder. I really felt like I was smarter than half of my professors. I wasn't. But I had been, it's funny, you know, you look back on your life and you're like, who did I think I was? But I was this New York sophisticate, and I'd gone down south to Virginia at 17 years old to start my collegiate life, and I just found that nobody was keeping up with me, so I thought. So that was the beginnings of my career. I'm putting you in my frame of mind. I was somewhat New York-centric and arrogant in my New Yorkness. However, I was daring to enter a world of media with very little preparation. The 4 years that I had spent at Hampton were spent for me honing my writing skills, but not necessarily my skills as to how do I break into this world of media. Even when I joined the National Association of Black Journalists, I was only given the tools to become a newspaper journalist, and I had discovered pretty early on in my college career that I had really wanted to embark on a career in magazines. I was telling the earlier group that I would spend hours upon hours in the university archives just researching vintage magazines. I was looking at old Harper's Bazaar from, you know, the early 1900s, not 1900s, I was looking at them from maybe 1920 to 1930. I was looking at old Ebony's from 1940 through 1960. I was enraptured there, but not in class, where the hard learning was happening, where the real strategic lessons were happening. I was somewhat lost. So again, just putting you in my frame of mind, going back to 1991 when I graduated from Hampton University. And of course, I landed at Hampton in the late 80s with a typewriter and only a typewriter. So you all have a clear understanding. You've talked to your parents enough. You know enough about the way things were. But I'm sharing that with you so that you can have some context as to what is truly available to you and how to manipulate that. Because I'm here to say, if I was able to do with my career what I've been able to do with my career starting when I did, then I expect fully that everyone in this room will be on somebody's podium at some point talking about what it is that they do. So I leave Hampton University and I have no job and I have no prospects and I am depressed as I don't know what, because I did not get the only thing that I thought was going to actually bring me to the next level, which was this Essence internship. Excuse me. I had a friend at school who, you know how you know a guy who knows a guy? I had a friend who knew someone who had just started a rap magazine. So imagine that. This is pre-Vibe, obviously pre the internet, and the world is being set on fire by hip-hop, little by little. Now this is who I was. I'm Gen X, so that means I'm the hip-hop generation. I went to high school with people who went on to have major rap careers. I spent my life kind of witnessing hip-hop come to the fore. And now I have someone who's saying to me, I have a friend who's starting a rap magazine. So my mom wasn't happy, my father wasn't happy. But when I got the call to come down to be the assistant to the publisher, not on the editorial side, I said, oh, heck yeah, I will be there. I show up and I walk into a room and it's filled with like young white guys and a few black guys from Temple and some other universities, and one woman. And I was jarred. This is my first lesson. How do you be who you are when you are one of few? And again, tying into my unapologetically black theme, and what I want you to mine from what I'm sharing from you is this core sense of self that predicates all success. I walk in this room, we're talking about 90s early hip hop, which misogyny is at its like complete height, and there's only one other woman in the room. And now I'm being charged to live in this world, not perform on the editorial side, but run errands for this guy who calls himself the publisher. Mind you, he's 22 years old. How do you take yourself seriously? How do you take your 4 years of college seriously? How do you have a vision for yourself as a magazine journalist and one-day creator in that kind of context? I'll tell you how. Thought. We were in those days very much like the first wave of the real world, let's say. So here I was for the first time in my adult life in a space with people who don't look like me. Contrary to what a lot of young African Americans face throughout their childhood and their educational years, I had always had pretty much 100% black existence. My neighborhood was black, my schools were black, I went to a black university. Now I'm sitting in a room with a group of college educated, yes, but not just college educated, Harvard educated, many of them, young Jewish guys who I had never really interfaced with. And now I have to present my worldview of hip hop to them with authority. And it was very, very intimidating. But I learned something in those years about being an only and the power in being unapologetic. I hadn't quite reached my full unapologetic black piece, but I was learning in some ways how to be just the unapologetic me, how I self-defined at that time. I always knew that I was a feminist. And I figured that if I was going to survive in this white boy-centered hip-hop world, I was going to at least have to bring my feminism in the room. And it's one thing to have a conversation about black feminism in particular with a group of young black women. It's another thing to have that conversation with a group of people who don't necessarily identify with your worldview. Immediately, I learned that the power of debate, the power of having somebody in the room who has a contrarian perspective is like, I don't even know how to express to you the magic that you can hold in your hands simply by being the other, simply by daring to bring to a space a way of thinking and a perspective that no one had considered is a game changer. Once they realized that I was going to be a complete failure getting coffee, but that I would probably be a star on the editorial side, I quickly was moved over to the editorial side, and I became the copy editor for the first national hip-hop magazine in the nation. And when I got there, we weren't national. When I left there, we had created the stage for Vibe and for Quincy Jones to come join Vibe and also export what we recognized as a subculture that was very much rooted in the black experience and very much rooted in an experience of people who often have little means, right? That's the hip-hop origin story to begin with. The reason guys are scratching on turntables is because they don't have means and they're trying to be creative. It's a theme that's followed me. How we can invent something out of nothing has actually been the thing that has given me the most attention throughout my career all the way to today, to Ebony. And I spoke to this a little bit when we were at dinner. So when I was at the source, one of the things that helped me understand that I had a keen understanding of how to see into the future was just how I listened to music. There was an artist at the time. Her name is Mary J. Blige. I hope you guys are familiar. She's obviously not young and hot today, but when I encountered her cassette tape for the first time, she didn't even have out what we called an album. But when I listened to her single, Real Love, I was struck. I said, this person with this kind of grainy soulfulness and this willingness to be this raw reminds me of what Aretha Franklin was to my mother's generation. And so in my very first review for the Source magazine, I'm 21 and Mary's 21, and we're both looking at the ground. I'm interviewing her and she's being interviewed by me, and we're both barely looking at each other. But I realized that me recognizing her generational relevance to me and tying that to Aretha Franklin's generational relevance to my mother would become the entire hook for the first wave of Mary J. Blige's success. I went on to review her single, and I said as much. I said that she will go on to be Aretha Franklin, who of course was known as the Queen of Soul. When Mary came out with her first bio for her first album, she was called the Queen of Hip Hop Soul. And that is a direct take from my 250-word single review in the Source magazine. So very early on in my career, I began to understand that a singular perspective can reverberate in a way that you never imagined. Again, this notion of being unapologetic in some ways, because I wrestled with whether or not it was okay to call someone who was so young and so hot and so hip-hop Aretha. Was I burdening her with something? But because it spoke to me in such an authentic way, and because I know how my mother listened to Natural Woman, and I know how I was bumping Real Love, and I knew that this was the same thing happening, I just went ahead and said it. And like I said, that carried Mary for the next 10 years. That moniker being, you know, the Queen of Hip Hop Soul, and that origin coming from me making her an analysis between her and the Queen of Soul was really, really powerful. So again, so that I don't feel like I'm speaking at you, I want to keep dropping things to you that I think are usable nuggets from my 20 years of media. Notice when you have a singular thought that no one shares. Invest in that. Mine that. Share it. Even if no one else co-signs, it might be that thing. So almost immediately, once I became known as the woman at the source and the sister who could handle the room full of guys talking hip hop, it gave me a certain cachet that I was able to trade on. And sometimes I was in rooms and I didn't even listen to the music, and I was kind of faking the funk. But because folks had seen in me a certain kind of presence very early on, I was able to carve through spaces that many, many sisters before and after me found very difficult to do in that world. So I'm going to take you to my next stop. Very interesting. After I leave the source, which is also the first time that I realized that politics and culture and style all had a place. When I was looking at magazines prior to my experience at the source, they were either fashion magazines or People magazine. They were either, like I mentioned earlier, a cart and driver, and I use that example to say a very, very niche magazine, or they were something so widespread like a Life magazine, a general interest lifestyle publication. Nothing, though, nothing combined all of my worlds. So put that in your back pocket, because that is the goal that I'm trying to get to now as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old young working journalist. Where can I go that is speaking to all the things that interest me? Okay, when I'm at the source, I get to be the one who says, I don't like how Bill Clinton handled Sister Soldier. So there I am talking hip hop and black feminism and politics at the same time. But outside of this source paradigm, how am I going to create that for myself? So when I left the source, I spent a few years freelancing, moved to Detroit for a couple years, and I freelanced for the Free Press and the Detroit News. But I then really realized that the world of newspaper writing felt too finite for me. I couldn't really see my creative impulse coming to light. So I moved back to New York, and I was wondering, you know, how will I ever recreate the heyday of my source years? Because again, the source was such an anomaly at that time. We had no competition. So we literally are every cool pop culture blog that you've ever been to. That's what the source is for the entire country. So it was a very exalted kind of place to be. But once I realized that there was no place to go from there, I was left with this burning question. So while I'm formulating what's going to be next for me on this grand stage that allows me to realize all these multiple selves, I land at a local publication, an award-winning magazine called City Limits. And at City Limits, I step into the world of white liberals. So now my political understanding is becoming much sharper, and who I am in the world as a black woman is becoming a lot sharper. And theoretically, I should be aligned with the white liberals who are running City Limits magazine, which is a magazine that covers city politics ultimately. I'm covering City Hall, I'm talking to firemen, I'm trying to figure out how I can inject myself in here, because I had become so used to injecting myself. I discovered that the world of white liberals, particularly at that time, didn't feel like the missing voice was the young black feminist. So what am I going to do now? How do I make myself heard? So I go back to some of what is my core self, again, this being this unapologetic Kierna. I know that I'm really, really good at talking to people, and I know that I'm really good at human interest, because at this point, I have figured out how to get people who aren't supposed to tell all their business to tell all their business. It can't be that hard if I'm, in my mind at the time, just covering city politics. I couldn't break through. I couldn't get anyone at City Limits to recognize my value, to recognize that I had a perspective that mattered and that I represented a generation that was about to change the world, literally. When I'm at the source, P. Diddy, then known as Puff Daddy, is driving a Volkswagen. You all know how the story goes, right? So I know at the time that the world is changing, and I am at the cusp, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let my 4 years of the source revert back on me into this space where my voice doesn't matter. But I had to deal with what I had, which is another nugget that I want you to think about as working journalists. Sometimes all you have is what you have, and so it's for you to be inventive. I decided that I wasn't going to sit in the back of City Hall covering the council folks that had completely put me to sleep. But I was going to talk about the fact that the mayor's policies were defunding organizations that spoke to people like me. And I'm going to go to these organizations, and I'm going to find the person with that single story that needs to be told, and I'm going to find a way to tell my story through them. All of a sudden, I'm a star at City Limits. All of a sudden, I have found a way to create a space for my kind of thinking, which was really my agenda all along. And some of it was an agenda that I didn't even know that I had, but I realized that for me, and I imagine that for you, feeling empowered at whatever stage of your career matters. Feeling like you're not so easily dismissed matters. And it's going to matter for you in your first professional job, and it's going to matter for you at your last, because the minute that you don't feel validated, you're asleep at the job. It's just like you're working for no reason. And I don't think that anyone spends the money that they spend to come to Syracuse to have a career where you feel like nothing matters. So again, there's a through line in what I'm saying, in that the self, the core self, must be tied to the journalist self, which must be tied to your personal agenda. And for me, it was to be seen and heard. At City Limits, I had a moment where I decided that I was going to just be my unapologetic black self. This is the first time that I'm framing it in this way, not in that language, but it's because I'm black, dear editor, sir, I have to do this. And that thing is take a day off of work, because as I'm on my way into work, the streets of Brooklyn, where I am from, are being flooded with mourners for the Notorious B.I.G. Here I am, this Brooklyn girl, raised on hip-hop, calls herself a part of the hip-hop generation, gave Mary J. Blige her moniker. And I'm in this white liberal space where no one wants to be bothered about my emotions. I'm already completely torn apart about what has happened in the world of hip-hop, and that we have arrived at this moment of not just the death of Tupac, but now the death of someone I knew, someone I called Biggie, who you all know as the Notorious B.I.G. I'm on my way to work. The streets are packed. We're on deadline. City Limits is not about to cover this moment. No matter what I'm doing at the nonprofits, no matter what stories I'm mining for, this is not a City Limits story. I can't frame this as I'm here because I'm reporting. But the reporter in me, and the journalist in me, and the black person in me, and even the feminist in me, who had at times been in very heated debates about the lyrics of said Notorious B.I.G., knew that I wasn't going to miss this opportunity. It didn't matter what was on the other end of it, but I had to experience what the people were experiencing. And in the moment that I decided that I wasn't going to go into work, the casket comes around the corner. Unbelievable. I had no idea that the funeral was actually having a processional through the streets. I just thought that folks were kind of collectively mourning. And before I knew it, people are playing his music from their Jeeps, and it's like out of a movie. It's almost out of a movie, really, to tell you what I experienced. And had I not just decided that I was going to stand on my unapologetic blackness, in the sense that this is a cultural moment that's not going to happen again. The Notorious B.I.G.'s casket is not going to come up Fulton Street again. I had better keep my behind right where I am if I don't want to miss it, if it means anything to me, if I'm going to be able to tell this story 23 years later at Syracuse University. So there are times in your career where you will have to decide if being in the moment is worth it for you, if missing the moment is worth it for you. So that's really my story about City Limits and that part of my life. I was not there very long, but it was never lost on me that taking the opportunity to be exactly where I was when I was, and trusting the journalist in me that this was a story to tell, even if the publication I was at wouldn't recognize it, was very self-defining for me, incredibly self-defining. Now, after City Limits, I then, and so what happens, I'll just quickly go back to what happened after the Biggie Small moment, because my bosses were not happy, not at all. As I said, we were on deadline. We're a very small team. Every person matters. Everyone is responsible for certain sections, certain pages. To the extent that I'm not there, I am holding up the process, and there was a price to pay. I genuinely believe that after I took that day off, and it was felt in the office that it wasn't just a day off, it was more a day of defiance, because I needed to be somewhere. Things began to take a negative, but things began to move in a downward spiral for me. And I felt that I had done all I could do, and realized that perhaps being in this space, this white liberal space that I imagined at the outset, because we vote similarly, and because we had some of the same kinds of ideas about politicians, especially of the day, that would be the synonymous with understanding. That left me after the Biggie Smalls moment. That left me. I realized that as a Black woman and as a journalist, I was going to be in spaces where we simply didn't share the same ideology, and that what mattered to me, the degree to which Biggie's life mattered to me, his music mattered to me, the coverage of hip hop at that time as we're exporting this subculture to the globe, it mattered so much, and yet I had a room full of people who discounted it, and I'm dancing and trying, when I say dancing, I mean figuratively, I'm trying to figure out how to not offend. It stopped for me then. And the next leg of my career was when Honey began. And Honey magazine for me was the nexus of me fully coming into my unapologetic self and my unapologetic Blackness. I really realized that if I was going to not be the only in the room, if I was going to bring these disparate worlds together, my political mind, my fashion sensitivity, my love of culture and the examination of culture, not just culture for culture's sake, but what does it mean? What are the people trying to say? In order to bring those worlds together, I was going to have to make that world. But having those first two stops taught me all I needed to know, not journalistically, and not as an executive, but as a thinker. And I think that an important thing to hear when you are a media student is that your thought, your thinking, is the thing that changes you from having a job to having a career. It's the reason why people invite you out and want to hear your story. So if you can find a way in your early careers to shore up your thinking, because it's not about arrogance, it's not about feeling like, oh, I had this grand thought, hear me roar. You have to challenge yourself. You have to put the thought before others who are critical thinkers, who are willing to push back, who are willing to challenge that idea, particularly as it relates to stereotype. Each one of us carries something that when we walk in a room, someone thinks they know something about us that they simply don't know. I would even challenge the few white men in the room. I would say that they walk into a room and everyone thinks, people who, particularly people of color, many times have placed you in a particular box. That box may or may not be true. As a young person, the way you think, shape your thoughts, shape your world, your words, your reporting, all of that serves humanity at large, but truly serves your career. Because if you prove yourself to be the white guy in the room, let's just say, who isn't what everybody thought, then suddenly you have a story to tell that everyone is interested in. Obviously, it's not typically the white guy in the room who has the burden of proving that he is not what you think he is, right? It's usually the burden of people who are not male and who are of color. For me, creating Honey Magazine was a way to say, both to myself and to the women who looked like me and felt like me and moved through the world like me, that we are here, that our perspective absolutely counts, and that it's saleable. This is something that people want to spend dollars on. If I wear high-top Jordan 1s and red lipstick, and it's 1998, and prior to that, if you wore Jordan 1s or Timberlands, you, quote, didn't wear lipstick, and if you did wear lipstick, you, quote, didn't wear Jordan 1s and Tims. What does that make me, showing up with both things on at the same time? And how is it that there's a legion of me And no one is photographing us, no one is talking to us, no one wants to hear from us, no one is taking in our worldview. I have got to be the change. With my college best friend, I shopped the idea for Honey Magazine for almost 4 years to every publisher you can imagine. And at a particular point when we were just about to give up, we heard from a publishing company that said, don't bring your lawyers and your business plan. We're not interested in doing business with you, but we will hire you to be the editor-in-chief and the editorial director of this thing you say can happen. We were going to do a Black L anyway, so if you don't come, we're going to do it without you. So, you know, what do? Do you throw away your entrepreneurial self, this self that said, but I want it to be cut in the deal. I see a way that this business really can sustain itself. I'd like to be at the table when somebody's telling you, we're not interested in you at the table in that form, but we'll give you a shot. My friend and I decided that for all the years and all the tears, it was worth us sacrificing our equity to see this thing happen on newsstands. And for any of you in the audience who are not familiar with Honey Magazine, I'm not just saying this because it was my creation. It lived on beyond me. It was a cultural game changer. It put hip-hop girls like me at center. We weren't at the source. I was in the room with the boys. We weren't at city limits. I was in the room with the liberals. We weren't even at Essence, where we were in the room with women who wore lipstick but not Jordan 1s and Tims. So creating Honey Magazine was an experiment of the unapologetic self. I'm not challenging you all to go out and create your own magazines. In fact, if you haven't already, considering how many that you all create here, don't. But do have a sense of mattering. Do have a sense of feeling like those intersections, those woven spaces that are yours and yours alone, one, probably exist in others. So there's always community. And two, if you recognize that the particular community that you belong to, wherever those intersections lie, are communities that are being exploited in any way, are being culturally borrowed from in any way, are being tapped into for perspective but not being credited in any way, then there's your entry point. There is where you enter. And I want you all to understand that whether or not you're a Black woman, whether or not you're a white man, part of what we are charged with as journalists, as folks who are mining for truth, and people who shape the world by storytelling, is centrality, is recognizing that this intersection that feels so singular also represents many, many people. And to the extent that you can tell your story well, you are going to represent a lot of folk. So that was my Honey experience. It didn't end well for me at Honey because of the business piece, but I have no regrets because, of course, I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have those Honey years. And again, pre-YBF, I don't know what sites you guys go to. I don't know where your gossip stuff comes from. I don't know where any of your like Black Girl Cool comes from. But I do know that Honey was all of those places wrapped in one. And there was not a celebrity person who was under 30 and Black and female who did not want to be a part of this experience and experiment. But the other thing was that hip-hop, because it had such cross-cultural appeal, and because not only were Black girls wearing Tims and red lipstick, but so were Asian girls, and so were young Puerto Rican girls, and so were all of the women who were kind of surrounding this world of hip-hop. We had also struck a chord with them because they were also young women who were not used to seeing themselves reflected, hearing anybody talk about anything that halfway resonated with them. So before we knew it, Honey was a multicultural publication by default, because there were many other subsets of this hip-hop girl that I saw myself as that needed this expression. So as journalists, I implore you, again, it's the thing that I will keep saying, find your thing. Find your thing. It can be the seed, that it can be the tie that binds an entire generation. I meet people today, particularly celebrities, who say to me that Honey changed their life. But I'll also be places and meet journalists. I met a woman, the editor-in-chief of Brides magazine is a black woman, and she's the first black woman editor at Condé Nast. And when I met her, she was the editor-in-chief of Uptown magazine. And she said to me, you know, you came to Howard one time when you were peddling honey, and I mean, I was literally peddling honey. Like, you know how people, you hear about folks back in the old hip-hop days that used to sell tapes out of their trunk? That was kind of how, that was the distribution plan for Honey magazine. So she said to me, I was there, I was in law school. This is her telling me her story. You came, you spoke, I saw Honey. I never thought about law another day in my life. Her career as a journalist began because somebody put something in front of her that felt so much like her, she couldn't turn away. And now she's the first black woman editor at Condé Nast, which of course is one of the leading publishing companies in the country and in the world. So the ways in which we touch people happen sometimes in very small ways, sometimes in very large ways, but in my experience, they've almost always been universally tied to me finding the courage to speak my unapologetic truth, whether that's in an editorial that I've actually written or by way of how I push back at a subject when I'm interviewing him or her, by the way I title something. In my post-Honey years, I went on to mainstream publishing. I landed at Hearst Publications, and I worked at a title called Cosmo Girl, which was the sister publication to Cosmo magazine, minus the sex. We were targeting teens and tweens. I was the only black person who shaped words and images there. I'm trying to search my mind and make sure I'm truthful. There was one other black woman, and she was the model. She cast models, so that's an important role. Not quite the same as being the senior editor of a publication, but there were not many black women at Cosmo Girl. There were not many black people in the Hearst building. I used to joke that my friends were the messengers, but it wasn't that funny because the only other black people that I would know for sure that I'd see were the messengers in the Hearst building. At any rate, at Cosmo Girl, and I'll make this part of my story really quick because there was a single moment that happened that defined everything for me. My editors were lovely women, lovely, lovely people, white women that did not have my story, my worldview, my perspective, my years at Honey, my years at The Source, my years at City Limits. Nonetheless, friendly people. I was challenged with doing a cover story on Jessica Simpson. Jessica Simpson, prior to my Cosmo Girl years, would have never crossed my radar. Not that she wouldn't have crossed my radar in terms of the American way that we exalt the quote-unquote girl next door, but in my personal world, I would have never been checking for a Jessica Simpson. I write the Jessica Simpson story. My editor titles it, The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. I was frozen. I had already made a name for myself with my political writings at The Source. I had already changed the game as far as I was concerned and as far as every other young woman who looked like me was concerned in the late 90s and early 2000s. And here I was at the destination, right? You're trying to get to Hearst when you are a magazine journalist. And these people that I spend all day, every day, trying to be okay around and have them be okay with me, back to the whole unapologetic thing, You know, you find yourself apologizing for things that are naturally you when you don't even mean to. But it came to a head the day that my editor said, I'm going to title this piece, The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. And of course, for her, it was about the soul of Jessica Simpson. It was about her kindness. It was about her generosity, all things that were legitimate. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I at that point, decided that I could no longer not be the black girl in the room, because what I had undone, and why I implore you not to undo your unapologetic nature, was get to Hearst and quickly try to change my tone. Hey, how's everybody? And all the things that I thought would kind of make me not so other, I worked really hard at doing. Some of those things were subconscious. But again, when it came to this title, and I knew that anyone that had ever read my writing at that point knew that this was not me. I would never call someone blonde the most beautiful anything, purely because that's already the narrative. And I had just spent the last 7 years shape-shifting and bringing new narratives to the table and calling things other than blonde pretty, beautiful. It caused a real fracture in the office. It was bringing in an unspoken, which is race, hello. It jarred my editor, because she knew from her perspective, she didn't think of herself as racializing anything. She didn't think of herself as promoting a narrative that had been promoted since the Mayflower. She saw herself as being true to Jessica Simpson. And the debates began, and the tears even for me at home, because where's the line? How much do you push back? What should your tone of voice be? How many other editors do you go to with this same complaint? Is this an HR situation? Am I going to let them run this story with my byline? What happens now? And this is not 2016. So a lot has changed in the world, but I'm just giving you the trajectory to help you understand that the reason that anyone might even think my story is valuable is because I have found a way to tap into the core self again at every journalistic stop along the way. That story ran with that title and my byline, and I was devastated. But it was not for me not fighting. It was not for me not changing the culture of our editorial offices immediately and forevermore. And it was not lost on me that even though this happened and I didn't storm out of Hearst magazines forever, I was never going to let it happen again. I was going to have the wisdom to know that going into something like this, I need to be clear about what my parameters are. As a writer, as a journalist, as an editor, I need to have some clarity. But in order to have that clarity, you got to know who you are. You got to know what you represent. You have to know what matters to you. You have to know where your intersections lie. You have to understand what they mean in the larger picture. Take your intersections and marry them with the macro. What happens now? What are the stories that need to be told? So I learned from that you're not going to win them all, but sometimes the wins don't always look like wins, and they're wins anyway. And I'll tell you that my peers from those Hearst years have been some of my biggest supporters today. When I'm back in the world of black media, they are the ones that trumpet to general market and to mainstream magazine media that this person is one to watch, and her skill set is unparalleled. And what she's done in this business, even though it wasn't done under the banner of Time Inc. or Condé Nast or Hearst Publications by and large, it was done, and you all should recognize it. So I have allies that I earned in part because they recognize that what matters to me, and ladies, I'm going to share that. Editors, I'm going to let you know that. So that's my piece for you there. Now, moving on to where I am today, and I think that may be the biggest piece of the unapologetic blackness. I'm going to show you all. I brought with me the issues that I've done. And if you haven't seen Ebony magazine, please do Google us and check out what's been happening with our covers, because they are changing the game again. And you know, when I came up with the Mary J. Blige moniker, I saw myself as a game changer. So that's what's the same about me then and now. Lots has changed, but what hasn't changed is that I realized that inside of me is someone who not only notices trends keenly, but has a unique way of understanding what the next trend is going to be. And so it's been the thing that I take with me when I walk into any room, because I convince people that I can see things that they can't. And that's been my Ebony experience, and I'm going to show you what I mean. This is the August issue of Ebony magazine. At this point, I was the editor-in-chief for 2 issues. For 2 issues prior to that, I was the cover director, which meant that I was not the editor-in-chief. I was the de facto editor-in-chief in some regards, but mostly I was there to make sure that we nailed our cover. And we shot Tina Knowles Lawson, who is Beyonce Knowles' mother. And we shot her for what is known as our, well, I've rebranded it as our hashtag Sexy Forever, but it used to be known as our Sexy at Any Age issue. And what I was trying to do on a dime was counter what you think you know about someone who's 61 years old. So what do? We talk to her about her sex life. We talk to her like we talk to someone who's 31 years old. What do? We shoot her like she's Beyonce. And we remind the entire world that you don't get a Beyonce without a Tina Knowles. It broke the internet. But this I'm really proud of, because this was me being unapologetic and saying, not just to the world at large, but also to the people who pay me every 2 weeks, that we can stand on an ideal. We can take our understanding. If we know that, I'm talking anecdotally, of course, but if, as a black person in America, if you know that this conversation has happened in some living room, at some kitchen table, during the course of your life, if you know that to be a fact, and we're 100% black here, and we say that our audience is African Americans, why can't we say what we say at home? And so the unapologetic nature of things is about me pushing back on the old, right? We have to say, Ebony's 70 years old. We've been around a really long time. We spent a lot of time covering celebrity. What does it mean to make a political statement on the cover of a publication that has historically dealt in celebrity? It means you have to be the same person you were at Cosmo Girl when you said, I am uncomfortable with this head. Conversely, in the Ebony room, you have to say, I am uncomfortable with us doing things as we've done them. I am proposing X, and this was X. And it did relatively well for us. It wasn't the true blockbuster that I was hoping it would be, but what it did instantly for me was establish the kind of editor that I am, where I was willing to go, how I was thinking about things. And I got a call from Samir Husni, who some of you magazine people may know. He's known as Mr. Magazine. He is someone who has covered the world of magazines for many years. But he called me and did a really long interview with me after this issue came out, because he was really curious as to how does a print editor do something like this when you know you have to sell it on newsstands. So I spent 2 hours basically telling him what I've been telling you all, which is that I believe in me. I am no longer apologizing for my intersections. I am black, And this matters. I know this to be a collective truth, and I'm going to stand on that and let the chips fall where they may. In consequent months, we went on to do really fun things. This was our September issue, and these are black models. What's exciting about this is that if you follow fashion at all, you know that black models barely get work. What's happened in the world of celebrity is that the black models that used to be on the cover of, say, an Essence magazine in the 70s and 80s and even in the early 90s are now all Rihanna. Black models don't get work. So what we were trying to do here was be very specific about the fashion industry. This is our September issue. September is always the biggest fashion month. And I recognize that while Ebony is not a fashion magazine, we're clearly a lifestyle magazine, we need to be making statements about the spaces that black people are in. We need to be figuring out how to put an underpinning of visibility where black people are not. So that's what this was about. And on another level, you know, in terms of like the nuance of magazines and how you get to play in this world in ways that you don't some other places, we also decided that we were going to make this very much about skin, literally. And that's why you see that there is someone on the cover who is albino and someone who has vitiligo on the cover as well, both black women. For our men's issue, back to hip hop, I said, how is it that the Tonight Show is led by a hip hop band and no one's talking about it? So I decided for my men's issue, instead of going the sports route, which is very traditional for lifestyle publications that want to cover men, let's take it back to the core. Let's take it back to musicality. Let's take it back to hashtag Black Boy Brilliance. I mean, we got playful with this, but we were also making a statement. There's also a statement here about size. You know, Amir, who's a friend of mine, Questlove, is obviously a plus size male. When it comes to images and when it comes to glossies, there is an over-the-top push for skinny. There is an over-the-top push for everyone looking like a Barbie doll, whether you're male or female. And so this was as much about bringing things back to hip-hop, not going the traditional route, which would have been to cover an athlete, but also about saying, see this person who is not a Ken doll, watch how he changes the world. And of course, The Tonight Show is a huge to-do, and this is one of the most talented musicians really in the country today. Then there's this issue. This issue caused a lot of controversy. A lot of controversy. I talked about it earlier at our dinner, and I'll allow you guys to ask me some questions. With this cover, it's our November issue. November is when we do what's known as our family issue. Sometimes we title our issues by name so that the audience knows it. Sometimes it's just an internal conversation. At all times, it's a sales conversation. So when I say it's our family issue, that means that the sales force for Ebony is going out and trying to speak to advertisers that are trying to reach families, separate and apart from the traditional advertisers that they're reaching every single month. So in this case, obviously, this is the Cosby Show family, also known as the Huxtables. During my teens and early 20s, they were very much the center of the world. They were what middle-class Black America certainly felt as their greatest export. And there was a whole bunch of respectability politics wrapped up in it. And by respectability politics, I simply mean, in terms of African Americans, this urge to fit a narrative that we have convinced ourselves will somehow erase the pangs of everyday lived racism and how it impacts our lives, our bodies, our worldview, etc. We wanted to do a lot of things with this cover. We really wanted to make sure that We talked about the Reagan 80s. We wanted to talk about the nuclear black family and whether or not it was time to decentralize that image. Have we done a disservice to Black America by making single black mothers feel that they're not enough? These are just questions. Some questions don't even have answers, but they have to be asked. This was about all of the questions. This was about the conversations that were happening at the dinner table at black families all the time with regard to the charges against Bill Cosby. What to do with this person that we had so exalted? Half of us believe him, the other half don't. Where are we as a community on this? So this cover got me a lot of coverage. I was on the Wendy Williams show. I talked about it a lot of places, and there are a lot of folks who are still angry at me because of it. But there are a lot of people who recognize that as an editor, again, my willingness to kind of stand on what it is that I believe is the single thought that is transformative, that is going to take us to another place, is why I get the call. And it's also why my bosses are issue by issue by issue asking me fewer questions, pushing back less. People always say to me, how did you get Ebony to do that? You know, every issue, it's like, what? It's because one thing begets the next thing begets the next thing. And one time when you stand up begets the next time when you stand up, but the people in the room, your audience, are like, oh, okay, that's what she does. That's what she does. She's unapologetic. This is now the end of the year and the beginning of this year, the end of 2015. I've not been the editor for a full year yet, so I don't even have 12 issues to show you. This is Jesse Williams, Harry Belafonte, and Zendaya. And as you can tell, they are imitating a protest. And what we were trying to say at the time, by way of these particular people, was that black arts, the arts, is so tied to black resistance movements in this country that we can't afford to allow our celebrity class to see themselves as separate and apart from the everyday struggles that other African Americans are tapping into. So we were trying to get really creative here, and we, of course, Jesse Williams is very popular on social media for his politics and his kind of unapologetically black position, and he's a celebrated Hollywood actor. So you ask yourself, you know, what's at stake for him? Now, is it easier for him to do that because of his complexion and his light eyes? Of course. And does he speak to that? Of course. But nonetheless, he's doing the work, and we wanted to celebrate him for that. Zendaya was a young woman, or is a young woman, who is a Disney star. She's coming into her womanhood, but some of you may recall when E's Fashion Police kind of tried to call her out for her twists that she had in her hair during one Oscar season, and they said that her dreads looked like they smelled of patchouli oil and weed. So Zendaya, very gracefully, I'll say, took E to task. And by doing so, and the way that she did it, the unapologetic way that she did it, and using her own means, using Instagram, which is her tool, right? That's her content creation. She decided that she was going to not only deal directly with the person who made the statement, but speak to the larger issue of ignorance and black girls' hair, which is a very du jour topic. It's a conversation starter for sure, and it's something that instantly took Zendaya from being a little Disney darling to someone who, has something to say, and it mattered. So we were here trying to show with Ebony that our artists, our actors in particular, are in the tradition of a Harry Belafonte, or at least that's our hope, that they would be more in the tradition of a Harry Belafonte, who, of course, was a civil rights leader in his own right, and who did a lot of work while doing artistic work. He did a lot of political work. So this was our urging of our artist community. Black Love, this was February. These are models, no celebs. Again, you know, sometimes invention is the mother of all good things. I was telling the smaller group that when you are Ebony today, ironically, you know, you could have never told me that as a magazine editor who wanted to create Black content in particular, that I would be fighting Marie Claire for Lupita. But that's the way of the world. Like, you could have never, ever told me during my Hearst years, where throughout my 4 Hearst years, all titles included, with the exception of the old magazine, which of course has Oprah's face on it, there were only 2 Black covers in 4 years. Not just for one brand, I mean all of the Hearst titles combined. So to find myself fighting publications for our stars is just the greatest irony. And because Ebony is just reestablishing its might in terms of contemporary, young, hot celebrities, I decided, instead of fight for them, why don't we do a concept that we know speaks to everyone? And Black Love did really, really well for us. It was another one of those covers that people just stopped and said, wow, you just never see that on the newsstand. I kind of can't believe that this is just a standard traditional magazine looking like a piece of art. And then our women's issue. So this is today. This is what's on the stands. This is what we dropped most recently. And, you know, every issue builds on itself, and each one is its own creation, but the history of the last one is always resonating in my head. I'm just so proud of this for so many reasons. I mean, these women are so brave and so bold, and the conversation about body image, in particular with women, and then when you drill that down to Black women, is a very important conversation to have on all cultural fronts. So my job as an editor was to figure out how to do this and do it well, how not to make it a joke, how not to make it something that could be ignored. And to do that, before I even knew who would be on the cover, I had to think about what would be on the cover. What were we saying? So again, there's some nuance here with them. We're playing in the whole military regalia thing, but we're really talking about the war on Black women's bodies. And so we frame it that way because we want to position them as soldiers. Now, there's a lot here. You know, in some rooms, we could probably have a deeper feminist conversation about why do women have to be half naked on the cover of any magazine. You know, but for me, because women who are plus size, meaning size 12 and above, meaning more than 50% of American women, are routinely ignored by magazines and desexualized and reduced to people who don't matter, who can't be stylish, who can't be all the things that all of the women who are a size 12 and above that I know personally happen to be, I decided that we were going to go in this direction because I wanted to say screw you to all of the non-believers. And I knew that this lineup would do that in an instant. So this is this issue, and I really would love for you guys to, when it comes out, it'll be on newsstands in about a week, pick one up, share it at your dorm, share it with your friends, talk about it. There's lots to talk about inside too. Ebony is a lot more than covers, but of course as editor-in-chief and as somebody who is challenged to reinvent something, it begins here. And to the extent that I do a good job transforming what you see, is the extent to which we are as an editorial team also rethinking what it is that you take in on the inside. So my career has been a winding one, and it's not over by a long shot. I hope one day that I get to have a class full of young people who dream like I dreamed. But my career was not linear, it was circular. My career has had a lot of ups and downs. I've talked to you guys about some highlights. That is not at all the places I've been and all the things that I've done. But it is important to know that when you are crafting your media career, you're not looking for the straight line. You're looking for the spaces that allow you to bring your entire self into the room. You're looking for the places where someone who looks and feels and thinks like you may not be represented. And if you find yourself in that space, that you dare to be unapologetic, that you dare to inject that point of view, hash it out, talk it out, think it out, debate it out, be critical with everything, but always be there. I guess that's about it for my remarks. I invite all of your questions, and I thank you so much for your time. I should have said to you guys, give me a time, because I didn't have a sense of how long. Yes. Have a seat.
And I will take this microphone, and you can use that. So what is that first question?
Almost advocacy journalism in some respects, because what she brought to MSNBC didn't exist prior to her being there. Her centralizing our stories of struggle, our feminist stories, was just, she alone was doing that. You know, in the cable news network landscape. I have to sit with her departure, how it happened, why it happened. I don't really understand how it went down quite like it did. It just isn't lining up for me. I know that there are some unspoken truths still around it, but I would say that have a piece of that in you, the willingness to walk away, particularly as a Black woman. Don't walk away if you don't have a plan, but you may have to walk away when you don't have a plan. And I think that in some respects, that's what happened to Melissa. To read her take on things, she was not given the best treatment to begin with. If you take her at her word, something like this was happening anyway. If you watch MSNBC as much as many of us do, you could see that clearly things were happening. I mean, Joy had just been, you know, things were starting to happen, and the color was starting to leave the network. But now, what I love about Melissa is that she takes to Twitter, and then she posts a GIF of, help me, Angela Bassett, exactly. Like, she's a bomb thrower. So I love her intersections. I love that she dares to be like a social media player. She understands how the medium works. She's still there in that space. She's also giving you like Black girl everything, like everything you thought you were gonna get in terms of the stereotype about us being neck popping and blah, blah, blah. She kind of gave you that hands-on hit moment that you expect from an angry Black woman. But at the same time, she was clear about the fact that this, for her, was very much about how you treat someone in the workplace, and that she wasn't going to have her story be told by them. She was going to tell it herself. So I give her props. It's unfortunate, because I'm going to miss her, but it kind of is what it is now.
Hi, my name is Jamie McCoy, and I'm a junior majoring in television, radio, and film as well. A question I have for you is in regards to your comment about always returning to like your core self through your journey. And my question is, I feel like there's an emotional process that also goes along with that, like constantly pulling in, turning inward to figure out who you really are before you represent yourself. And I think as a Black female media student, I oftentimes struggle with that because Newhouse classes do replicate a lot of what you were talking about. Like, there aren't many Black students in Newhouse classrooms. Right. So there is a censorship that happens mainly because you want to be unapologetic, but you don't know the difference between being unapologetically Black, right, and being an unapologetically Black professional. So I feel like a lot of times, a lot of mentors preach, be who you are and don't be sorry for that, but that gets internalized incorrectly, and we come across as like ghetto in the classroom or like unprofessional. So I just wanted to know, like, what emotional process happened for those internal thoughts of being unapologetic to becoming externally like projection, and how do you maintain professionalism like throughout that?
That's a brilliant question, and it's many questions in one, and I don't have a simple answer. I may not have the full answer, in part because I still live it. Nothing's changed. I'm still a black woman in media. I still have to make spot decisions in the moment. I have to decide what I'm presenting, who I am, how do I feel. These things never go away. I think the first thing is to recognize that as black women in a space, this is a core part of our journey. We are going to have a certain amount of internal conversation most places that aren't shared because of how often we find ourselves the only in a room, and because of our particular intersections with gender and race in a country where gender and race kind of dictates everything. In a world where gender and race kind of dictates everything. I grew a lot. My own womanhood, my own maturation process helped me to be a bit more discerning about the times that it made sense to pull a Melissa Harris Perry versus when not. So I use Melissa because Melissa's gonna be okay. Melissa has a PhD. Melissa is a professor. She's an author many times over. She's a proven television person. So her risk-reward thing is slightly different than it might be for you at this stage of your life and career. But that said, you know what the conversation is in a given classroom, and you know where your line is. I would say to everyone, if there's ever a point in your life, particularly in your academic career, where you feel your line has been crossed, that's your cue to not care so much about how others internalize what you have to say, but to say it. Because so often we eat our thoughts. We kind of like, they get right there and it's like, and they just force them right back down. And it's detrimental to not just yourself, but also the people in the room. See, the other thing about the apologetic piece is that it's a gift to everyone else. When we share our core, and when it's principled, and I'm speaking to journalists, so I'm assuming that there's a certain degree of core, morality is not the word. There's a certain sense of the world around you. You understand humanity, you care about humanity. You're storytellers, so you have to care about people, right? I think that if you can take each particular moment one by one, don't lump them together, don't make them a single story, each particular moment, and ask yourself, is there a line I can live with or not? That's your first question. Because certainly if you feel offended in any way, because there were so many times throughout my early career where I was so personally offended and didn't deal with it. And had I probably would have been onto a great story, or probably would have been heard by the right editor, or at Hearst, I really should have been having a corporate conversation, and I was having it with like women who weren't even my age. You know, it just, making yourself small is a disservice. So everyone needs to work, and there are concessions that happen even for folks who claim to be quote unquote free. We all make daily concessions. You know, unless you're the Unabomber living in a shack in the middle of the bush, you are someone who reports to someone, you answer to someone. You be smart, but you recognize that that awkwardness, that uncomfortable feeling that fills the room when somebody says something that wasn't supposed to be said, but they said it anyway, and it's a responsible statement, and it's responsible meaning responsible to your truth. and is not filled with all of the isms that people who think, so to be black and unapologetic is not the same thing as to be white and unapologetic in the same way, right? So it's because what you're doing is countering something, right? The idea of being black and unapologetic is to counter this idea that black thought, identity, culture, women, men are less than. Our experiences are not as valid, just as they are, without any other filter. We don't have to filter our things through any kind of lens, not an American lens, not a European lens. We can just be who we are, and that should be enough. There are not many times outside of your academic lives where there isn't a cost for being the voice, but I will say to you that if you can find your line, what can I live with versus what is going to absolutely make me sick tonight if I don't say anything, if I don't address this in some way. When I say something, I don't necessarily mean pick up the mic. I don't know what say something means in your respective worlds, but you do, Take that with you from college to your first professional work environment and test. The first time that the line is like, I'm gonna be upset tonight if I don't deal with this, that's your first measurement right there. Test. And I think that most people today, young people, you guys are so sophisticated, you're so savvy, you deal with so many different types, even in social media. You can discern for yourself whether or not you're bringing something to the room that no one is ready for at all. Like, if you're, depending on where you work, if you're a writer, if you're a journalist, if you are on television, you can talk about imagery. You're on television. That's safe. That's not the same thing as you talking about something that has nothing to do with the world that you're in. So I'm long-winded, but you asked a really important question that I deal with and struggle with every single day. You find your line and you are daring in it, but you're going to have to make some concessions and sacrifices. They just shouldn't be so routine that your whole life is lived apologetically. Activity piece. For one, we do all know that even at the most quote-unquote objective places, that the writers and the editors and that everyone does have a POV. They do have a perspective, right? The New York Times is the New York Times and has been what it's been because the editorial board is what it is. There are people who are journalists who are challenged with objectivity that routinely bring themselves to the room when perhaps they shouldn't. So my first piece would be to give yourself a little bit more permission if you really are convinced that for your title, your content creation, what you see is actually going to take things further, going to further the conversation, going to bring something into the room that wouldn't have been in the room before if you just relied on the way things had been. But there is a line, and you do have to be careful that you don't personalize other people's stories, that you don't personalize whatever event that you're covering. Just because you have a personal take on it doesn't mean you're personalizing it in your reporting of it. So it's another thing that happens for me all the time. I ask myself this question all the time. Am I as objective as I can possibly be when I'm talking to whoever it is that I'm talking to? So I think for you, it's important to ask yourself the question, to keep your kind of journalistic hat always turned to objectivity, but recognize that that term in and of itself is disingenuous. There's always an objective in media, especially in American media. So, and I personally think that we need more Black women editors, news directors, journalists, the whole spectrum, not just Black women, but all people of color, really. But in particular for me, if there wasn't just one Melissa Harris Perry to talk about, maybe this moment for her wouldn't even be as big a deal as it is for all of us. But the fact that she's gone and now who? We're still at when you take one off, you've taken the whole lot of us. So I say that, we can afford to throw a little bit of how we see the world into the room and still call it objectivity.
Hi. I wanted to know your thoughts on Black Twitter. Basically, I feel like Ebony, before the rise of social media, was kind of the voice for the Black community on both like the social and political ends. And I feel like Black Twitter is almost a more organic form from more of, your readership. So I wanted to know, like, in what regards do you think that Ebony intersects with Black Twitter? And do you ever consult Black Twitter? Like when you're
Twitter, even before I got the EIC post, was already shaping a lot of what we were doing on the site. Now, the tricky thing is to know how to mine a thing for what you're looking for and not get sucked up into the narrative of Black Twitter isn't always where I want to go, but I always want to use that people measuring tool for what it is. I need to have a sense of groupthink. I want to know, like, okay, if the most popular person in the room stands up and says A, what does everyone do? And then is what that person said what I would have said? Is that what we should say as a magazine, as a brand? So you're dissecting, but Black Twitter is absolutely a tool. I think it's the most interesting space where Black academia, there is language happening now that is a direct result of the intersections of Black Twitter. Even the president the other day, when it was Black History Month and Michelle was there and they were hosting all of these Black journalists, and somebody said, hey, Michelle, remember it was the Braxton sister or something, who say, hey, Michelle, and then he comes back and he's like, well, it's Black people, it's Black History Month when somebody's like, hey, Michelle. But I thought about how that hey, Michelle was really a riff off of what Black Twitter has done with kind of like gay boy language and that kind of, hey girl, like, so it was being flipped, all these things, even talking about misogynoir and unapologetic Blackness. This is all language that is coming together on Black Twitter, specifically because you have academics who are meeting the hood, who is meeting media, who's meeting, like, we're all kind of like meeting up in these rooms and spaces and sharing and borrowing. And I've never felt more connected to more Black PhDs than I have since Black Twitter. But at the same time, if I need to know what the hood is saying, it's right there for me. So it's just like, I love it. It's just a pie. And I think it's brilliant. It certainly shapes me. You should reference it too. It's just, learning how to be discerning and not rely on it to the extent that it is dictating what you do and say. You use it as an information tool because that's exactly what it is.
A senior broadcast digital journalism and sociology major. I first wanted to say thank you. Literally every word that you've spoken tonight has really resonated with me. Like I said, I'm a broadcast digital.
So welcome.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm a BDJ major, and I realize I'm one of, I think, 3 or 4 Black women in that program. And as I get ready to move out into the workforce, clearly the field is going to resemble most of that. But I don't know if you said this earlier in your talk, but when you were first starting out in your career, being in the communications field as a journalist, a field that is built strongly much so off of relationships and connections, how did you, I guess, take that leap of faith and begin to do that even when you knew that some of the beliefs and views that you had on the same stories and the same issues as people was probably a lot different than without isolating yourself or feeling left out of something?
There were times, a lot of times since I just kind of walked into a room full of very, very, very accomplished, and mind you, fabulous, Prada down editors who are living their best New York life and really making magic in their own lanes. I stepped back into that room as an only. Just happened the other day, and I immediately had that feeling of does Ebony count? Is my career parallel to their careers? And I'm not the editor-in-chief of Glamour. I'm not the editor-in-chief of Vogue. I'm in the space with them. This is the self-talk and the self-doubt that can consume you. At the same time, what I try to push through and the space that I try to get myself to quickly is the reminder that, first of all, one-on-one, any one of you girls I'll take. You know what I mean? Like, one. Two, you probably want to know as much about me as I want to know about you. So there's a lot of like self-talk and back to the whole human psychology thing that will go on for the rest of your life. You just have to remind yourself of how valuable it is that you're there even. So if I take myself out of this room with all of these women who have been editors for the past 25 years and who have black car service and who have all the things that I don't have at a small publication, at a black publication, if I diminish my value, my worth, I'm certainly not serving you. You'll never get here if I don't stay in the room, you know what I mean, on one level. But also for myself, there's just the reminder that there have been too many brilliant black women who have been singular, who have dared to speak their truth and have transformed the world, both of the past and of today's time. I mean, you don't, like, Oprah really exists. She really did. I mean, we're post-Oprah today, but there was a time when, I mean, if you think this cover is a big deal, what do you think, to look like this and to walk into anybody's television studio, to end up with a network? It's just, these are the things that we didn't imagine, and I'm sure she has had this same kind of feeling of not necessarily knowing her place all the time. But you do know your place. You know the child that was raised in your parents' home. You know how smart you are when you're debating with your girls. You know how critical a thinker you are when you're throwing things at the TV. You know these things. So you just have to remember them when you're in the room. There's no magic trick. You'll always probably have to remind yourself that it's important to be there and to not second guess every little thing. I'm like, look, I'm fabulous too. I may not have the Prada, but whatever. You know, like I just have to you just have to do it. You just have to do it. And then the other thing is, black women in particular, our stories are unique, they're interesting, and other people want to hear them. So when we don't tell our stories, our perspective, when we shrink instead of grow in a room, like I'm saying, we really do cheat others too, of an experience, of a learning, of so much, you know. So just continue to be who you are. It's unfortunate, but it's almost like a lot of the cliches are the things you have to rely on. Like, just be you and do your best and hold your head up. Yes, all those things.
Oh, yeah. Here tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us as well.